heal from the pain of grief. The Grief Share video seminars, workbook exercises, and small group discussions give participants encouragement, useful advice, and hope.
The Grief Share videos are excellent.
The video strengthened me.
It's a freeing kind of thing to be able to talk about your loss.
My workbook helped me to unravel the feelings I was going through.
If you know people in your church or community who are grieving the death of a loved one, tell them about Grief Share. Or visit a Grief Share group yourself to heal from the pain of your grief.
There was such a void until I got into Grief Share.
I never really healed down deep until I came to Grief Share.
Grief Share brought me out of my sadness.
Begin your journey from mourning to joy at Grief Share.
All right, Grief Share every Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock. If you're going through something, please show up. It only lasts about an hour. Unless Miss Ronnie is there, then it goes for 3 hours. No, just kidding. I haven't picked on Miss Ronnie in a little bit, and so be praying for her. I love Miss Ronnie. So good to have Miss Bonnie back. She's been on vacation, traveling around the southeastern United States, and so, yes. So we appreciate seeing her back, and some of you other folks, it's good to have you back. We thank you for that. And so before Brother Johnny comes, I want to make this one last announcement that right after the service, let me see your hands if you're a young adult or a teenager. Young adult or teenager. Okay. You say, what is a young adult? I think they said if you don't have grandkids, then you qualify as a young adult. All right. So if you have grandkids, you're more than, and if you feel young, then you're welcome to this. Right after the service, if you could either go through this door, the room that's right here, our youth, we're actually calling this our young adult / youth lounge. And so if you'll meet in there with Brother Johnny and Sister Cassandra, and that's funny to call my daughter sister. And so, anyways, but if you'll meet with them afterwards, they just want to take a little bit of time, won't be long. I promise you that. They just want to meet with you, get some ideas. They're going to start that ministry going. This is really quick, and they're going to try to set some date to do some things. So you don't want to miss it. So right after the service, go out there. Don't drag your feet because you'll miss it. And so if you'll go right out there, we appreciate that. And so this morning is such a privilege for me to be able to introduce my son-in-law, Johnny Franklin. And I've known Johnny for many, many years, obviously now. He's married to my daughter, Cassandra. And what I really respect about Johnny is before he married my daughter, he actually called me. We were living in Maine, and he asked for my permission to be able to marry her. And, of course, my first response was no. My daughter's never getting married. And but, no, it was a quick yes, and we had a great time, and I gave him some advice, and obviously he didn't listen to any of it. No, just kidding. And so, but he did listen to it. Matthew, would you behave yourself? And so, yeah. And so, but it's really a privilege. I'm so thrilled that Johnny is called to preach. Not exactly sure what his calling is as far as ministry goes. Right now, the biggest desire and burden is for young adults and young people, and that is a big need all over the country, big need for here. And so we're thankful that they travel an hour and a half to get over here. Also, at the end of the service, please don't let me forget Brother Tim. We're going to take up a love offering for Brother Johnny, and so we dig in deep for that. So we put the pressure on for him to preach a good sermon, and so that you'll dig in deep and you'll give well unto that. But it's such a privilege to have Johnny. I'm trying to take my time introducing him so he gets a little bit more nervous as we go. And so he's like, what do you mean? You shut up, let me do this house. So, but Johnny, you come. It's good to have Brother Johnny. I'm going to see what kind of applause you get. So come on. Okay. Come on, buddy.
Good morning, everybody. So this is the first time I have preached with an iPad. So we'll hope, fingers crossed, everything goes good. First of all, I want to say a few weeks ago, I had a completely different sermon I was working on, and then I just, I've been talking with Pastor Mike about trying to get something started with the young adults doing a ministry, and it just seemed the time was right to go ahead and move forward on that. And so that completely changed the message that I was going to bring today too, to kind of go along with, why I have this burden and really what why I see this needs to be a burden of the church as well. And if you can just bear with me, because I'm trying to move my way through this. After 2 rounds of COVID, I'm having some symptoms that still linger, and some of it is getting short of breath sometimes. But if we could, you can get the slide up for me there. Okay. Normally I'm in the booth doing that, so it's kind of weird having to, yeah. But today I want to talk about what is the missing generation. And I call it the missing generation. You're going to find out exactly why I deem this generation in particular the missing generation. I kind of already knew this to be true, but I was actually looking through and found a study recently. And what I'm about to present to you really should give everybody in this congregation some heartbreak with what I'm about to share. But according to a recent Gallup poll, this is from last year, the overall percentage of Americans that attend church has fallen below 50% for the first time in history. That means if you are in church right now, you're in the minority. And even worse, and by the way, does anybody love statistics and charts and diagrams as much as I do? Okay, a couple of you. You're a teacher, so of course. All right. I want you to take a look at this graph, and let me show you what this is saying here. Now, there's some generations up there, and if anybody doesn't know what generation they belong to, the traditionalists, this is those born before 1946. This is the oldest generation. The baby boomers, which is the largest generation that we have, hence the name, those born typically between 1946 and 1964. Generation X, 1965 to 1980 if you were born. And then the millennials, and that's who I'm going to be talking about today. Those born between 1981 and 1996. Those are the young adults today. So those are your 20-somethings, your 30-somethings, your early 40, okay? Those are the young adults. And what I want to show you here is church membership has been declining among all generations and every decade in general. And that's kind of what this shows. If you see that nice blue line up there, kind of almost looks like a straight line. Okay, this is the decline in church membership among generations from 10 years ago. And if you see traditionalists, the oldest generation, of course, has the most presence. Each generation, it seems like that number goes down a little bit. And then, of course, millennials there at the very end. But I want to show you in this most recent poll, this is 10 years later. This is from last year. That's that red line you see right there. And if you'll see, traditionalists, baby boomers, Generation X, there's a little bit of a decrease. But then take a look at the millennials. Does everybody see that gap? That gap should scare you. It scares me. 36%. That means 2/3 of our young adults are not in church today. Have nothing to do with, and when we say church membership, by the way, that could mean you show up for Easter and you show up for Christmas. It's a very vague. I mean, if we really got it down into those that show up faithfully, those that truly believe, it'd be an even lower percentage than that. But this is 2/3 of young adults have nothing to do with the church, nothing to do with God whatsoever. And that's why I call this the missing generation. Because if this trend continues, we're going to see them completely gone from the church. And then you can probably guess what that means for the generations that follow. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So the first thing I want to talk about, why are the millennials disappearing from the church? Why? What has happened in the last 10 years that has caused so many millennials to just completely disappear from the church? Well, Paul actually talked about this when he was speaking to a young Timothy that he was mentoring and preparing for the ministry. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 3. I want to read this starting with verse 3. If anyone teaches false doctrine and does not agree with the sound teaching of our Lord Jesus Christ and with the teaching that promotes godliness, he is conceited and understands nothing, but has an unhealthy interest in disputes and arguments over words. I'm going to stop right there for a moment. Does that sound like something to anybody? I think everybody in here probably, as soon as they heard those words, and by the way, the background you see for those verses was done on purpose. Sounds like social media, doesn't it? Okay, what do we see every day? Disputes over words. From these come envy, quarreling, slander, evil suspicions, and constant disagreement among people whose minds are depraved and deprived of the truth. I could preach a whole sermon on that. Who imagine that godliness is a way to material gain. There we go again. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out. If we have food and clothing, we will be content with these. But those who want to be rich fall into temptation, a trap, and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And by craving it, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Okay? Everything I just read there, you probably heard those words and said, that sounds exactly like today. Okay? Now, one thing I do want to be clear, and I want to be careful to preface this and give you kind of a disclaimer. How many of you believe the Bible is a living book? Okay? And when we say it's a living book, what that means is you're talking about a book that was written for an audience originally 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, but still has applications with what we see today. And we have to be careful, and Pastor Mike and I were talking about this last week, especially those that are in the Revelation class. So often we want to look at the Bible and immediately start trying to line it up with current events, as if the Bible suddenly came alive in the 21st century. Okay? But we have to remember, somebody reading the Bible 100 years ago, 200 years ago, these same things were happening. Okay? But the difference today is, and I believe, and I think everybody would agree with me here, we're so much more aware of it. You can get that next slide for me there. Okay? Because so many of these things are affecting the millennials more than any other generation, especially with things like social media. If you look at the entertainment today, I was talking with somebody recently. I said, I grew up, and again, I'm about to show my age. I grew up as a kid in the 80s. We had the best movies in the 80s. We did, the best movies in the 80s. And if you look at the movies today, I said, I think people want to be depressed. It's like every blockbuster movie, every great TV show you see right now, it's all about the villains. It's all about the bad stuff. And this generation is being bombarded with that and being beaten down with it and starting to feel like we have no future. And then, of course, and just kind of like, and again, I put these slides together for a reason. As you see in here, I think so many millennials today, they've gotten so caught up on that materialistic thing. What about the house that I don't have? Or what about this that I don't have? But those that came before me have it, but I don't have it. And I can't attain it. And then it's starting to cause so much despair among this generation. We've seen, and I won't get into all the details, but you know what I'm talking about. We've seen constant division in this country. And that division is affecting the millennials like no other generation. Right now, they have no idea who to trust. They don't trust authority. So, of course, they come in the church, they're not going to trust what they're being told. So we see these things at work so much more in the millennials right now, and that we see them that they're leaving the church in droves because of these things that are affecting them today. And again, these things are not new. These things have been around, but it's just today, it just seems like it's so much more accessible. And we're so much more aware of it. So the question now becomes, what can we do? What can be done? What can we do to keep this generation from disappearing entirely? And who in the church bears this burden? Well, first thing I want to show you, and again, I'm going to be using Paul a lot. I could have used all of Paul's letters pretty much to do this sermon, but then we would have been here for about 4 hours today, and I don't think anybody would appreciate that. But I want to look again in 1 Timothy, as Paul is departing this wisdom to Timothy. Chapter 6, he says, "But you, man of God, flee from these things," those things we just talked about, "and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. Fight the good fight of faith." I want you to remember those words because I'm going to keep talking about that here in just a moment. Fight the good fight of faith. Take hold of eternal life to which you were called and about which you have made a good confession in the presence of many witnesses. In the presence of God, who gives life to all, and of Christ Jesus, who gave a good confession before Pontius Pilate, I charge you to keep this command without fault or failure until the appearing of our Lord Jesus Christ. Paul was telling Timothy, fight the good fight. And that's one of the biggest messages, I think, that is lost on this current generation. We're constantly being told, We're constantly being told by social media, by all the stuff out there, give up. It's not worth fighting for anymore. And yes, I'm talking about things outside the church, but then that carries into the church. Because if we're being told out there to give up and not fight the good fight, why are we going to want to come to church where we're told we have to fight? And the image that you see up there, I love this image because every time I hear those words, fight the good fight, I immediately think of boxing. And when I think of boxing, I think about my favorite film of all time. And some of y'all are about to be surprised if you know me, Rocky. My favorite film of all time. Not 4, no, the first one, okay? Talk about good movies in the past. Okay, hold on, go back one, go back. I just had to show this real quick, show you this is how much I love this movie. So last year we went on a vacation trip. We went up north to visit some relatives, visited my brother in South Carolina, went up to Maryland to visit Cassandra's grandparents. And then on the way back, we made a couple of sightseeing trips, stopped in D.C. We stopped in Philadelphia just so I could do what you see in this picture. Finally got to cross it on my list. I ran the Rocky Steps. If anybody knows what I'm talking about, the steps right in front of the Philadelphia Museum of Art that you saw Rocky. And I ran them, by the way. This guy ran those steps up to the top. I earned the right to take that picture. Okay, but I love Rocky. And one of the things about Rocky is because anybody remembers the first film, he didn't even win. It wasn't about winning. It was about going the distance. And then, of course, everybody knows the story. He came back and won again, became friends with Apollo Creed, and, I won't go into the rest of it. But anyway, that whole message was about fighting the fight, staying in the fight, not getting out. And in Rocky Balboa, and yes, I'm using Rocky as a sermon illustration. In Rocky Balboa, he makes a great quote, and I love this. Probably one of my greatest motivational quotes ever. It ain't about how hard you can hit, but about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. And that's pretty much what Paul was telling Timothy here. Take the hits. You got to take the hits and keep moving forward. It's not about how hard you can fight back. It's about how hard you can get hit sometimes. And I think that's a message that's lost on this generation today. And I just have to say this, and this is one of the things I've been so encouraged and so just overjoyed coming into this church, because what I see in this church is a lot of you fighting the good fight. I see so many of you, some of you have shared your burdens, which I'm going to talk about that too in just a moment. You've shared your burdens, and I've seen the suffering and the things that you're going through, but you continue to fight. We as a church, that's what we have to do. Keep fighting the fight. This is what a message this generation needs to hear more than anything, is to keep fighting. Even when things look like there is no future, we have to keep fighting. Keep taking the hits, okay? And the thing is, you have to remember too, because when Paul was giving this message to Timothy, these weren't just idle words. Okay, Paul says again in 2 Timothy, in his second letter to Timothy, chapter 4, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time for my departure is close. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. There is reserved for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not only me, but those who have loved his appearing." In other words, those who have longed for his appearing. Paul, in other words, is saying, I've been where you're going, and I fought the fight. Now you keep up the fight. That's where the burden comes on. Again, I'm talking about the millennial generation, but to those earlier generations that are sitting here in the church, we need you to keep fighting the good fight. This generation needs to see you fighting that good fight, okay? That's one of the things, because every generation, as you saw that church attendance, it follows every generation. A little bit gets lost every generation. If we start having, and again, I don't like using these labels, but just to make it easy, with the Generation X, with the baby boomers, with the earlier generations, if you start giving up the fight, what do you think is going to happen to this generation? We need to see you finishing the race. We need to see you finishing that race so that we can continue to want to endure ourselves. And this is where it comes together. Again, as you can start to see where the burden falls. The burden falls on all of us. Okay, it's not on just one generation. It's not even on the previous generation. It's on everybody. We all have to fight that good fight together. And that leads me into the second thing that millennials need the most right now if we want to bring them back into the church. And again, using Paul, writing this time to the church at Galatia, he said in Galatians chapter 6, starting in verse 1, he says, "Brothers and sisters, if someone is overtaken in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual, restore such a person with a gentle spirit, watching out for yourselves so that you also won't be tempted. Carry one another's burdens. In this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone considers himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Let each person examine his own work, and then he can take pride in himself alone and not compare himself with someone else. For each person will have to carry his own load." But here I want you to listen to this. "Let the one who is taught the word share all his good things with the teacher." And I won't talk about that too much, but it's another thing. As you're mentoring and discipling others, we want them to come back and share those things. And Pastor Angelo, I know you understand this as a teacher, and I've been there too as a teacher myself. Isn't it great when you have a student that comes back and tells you, "I did something with something you taught me"? Okay? That's another thing. We want this generation to not just be teaching them, but also have them coming back and saying, "Look what I did with what you taught me." Okay? Continuing in verse 7, "Don't be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever a person sows, he will also reap. Because the one who sows to his flesh will reap destruction from the flesh, but the one who sows to the Spirit will reap eternal life from the Spirit." And listen to this carefully. "Let us not get tired of doing good, for we will reap at the proper time if we don't give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us work for the good of all, especially for those who belong to the household of faith." I don't know if you didn't realize this, but what Paul's talking about here is community. And it's a word that's kind of been showing itself to me a lot lately. One other thing you're going to learn about me here is I love to watch documentaries. My wife makes fun of me all the time. I probably watch more documentaries than I watch regular films. I love learning. I love looking at things from different perspectives. And one topic that seems to keep coming up a lot is cults. Because I'm always very interested to know cults. Yeah. C-U-L-T-S, if I didn't say it right. I'm always interested to know what is it that brought people to get involved in some. And when you look at what some of these cults believe, like I'm not going to talk about Scientology right now, but talk about some out there beliefs. What is it that brings people into that? And the common theme that keeps coming up is community. It's because they found a place where they felt like they belonged. Isn't it sad that a lot of our churches can't make that same claim? Okay? We have to be a community of believers, not just a meeting place for believers. That's what Paul's talking about here. We sharing each other's burdens. Millennials right now, I think, have the most difficulty forming relationships with each other. Because again, we've been so bombarded with this online presence, and a lot of this generation have started to lose that ability to form close personal relationships with others. Some of them don't even really understand what a relationship is. We have to be a community of believers to bring them into that and form those relationships. And that's where I feel, and I'll try not to get off on a rabbit trail here, but that's where I feel like I've seen other churches, and I've seen where their young adults are scattered out because they just don't feel connected. They come in and the older generations feel comfortable there, but the younger generations come in, they just don't feel that they're part of the group and get pushed out. Or a lot of the young adults they see in the church, they project this perfect image that, well, I'm not living up to that image, so why do I want to be in this church? True community obviously wants to look good, but a true community also is willing to share with each other even the things that are bad. And that's what we have to be as a body of believers, as a community, to welcome these millennials in. And that also goes along with the ministry and with what I'm going to be meeting with the young adults today about, is I want to start a community. I want to get a community started of young adults here and teens to get a smaller community, but then a community that's also basically grafted into the larger community of the church. But at least getting everybody together to say, look, we are all here for each other. And that's what we're starting with this. Y'all been listening faster than I thought you would, because I can't believe how fast I'm actually getting through this. But in other words, if you haven't got from the message here, the burden of helping to restore this current generation that is falling away, the burden falls on everyone, regardless of age, regardless of generation. Keep fighting the good fight. We need to fight that good fight together, and we also need to make sure that we keep in mind that idea of community, a community of believers. Because here, and this is the final thing that I want to close with, what is the cost? What is the cost, especially to the church, of losing this generation to the world? What's the impact of a spiritually dying generation? What do we have to look forward to if we don't do something? Well, you can probably already kind of figure out each generation obviously disciples the generation that follows. And we see this with Paul. You know, when Paul was talking with Timothy here, Paul wasn't just equipping Timothy as a disciple. Paul was equipping Timothy as a leader to disciple others. It's passing from one generation to the next. So obviously, if we start losing one generation, what do you think is going to happen to the generations that come after that? We've already got names for them, by the way. This next generation coming up after generation, technically millennials, Generation Y. We got Generation Z is the next one. Those are the teens right now. And then my two kids fall in this generation. Next one, which kind of scares me, the name of it, Generation Alpha, because it sounds almost like we're starting over again. So that kind of scares me if you start thinking about what that could mean. But we've already got, they've already identified and come up with the names. We've got these two generations that are coming behind. If we don't fix this now, obviously we're going to start to lose those generations as well. And with that, and again, we talked about the church as a community, but I want to look at another definition of the church that'll help put this in perspective of what's going to happen if we lose this generation. This time, Paul speaking to the church at Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And I love it, Pastor Mike kind of was saying something along this earlier. For just as the body is one and has many parts, and all the parts of that body through many are one body, so also is Christ. For we are all baptized by one Spirit into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, whether slaves or free, and we are all given one Spirit to drink. Listen to this. Indeed, the body is not one part, but many. If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body, it is not for that reason any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body, it is not for that reason any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God has arranged each one of the parts in the body just as he wanted. And if they were all the same part, same generation, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. Or again, the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, these parts of the body that are weaker are indispensable. And those parts of the body that we consider less honorable, we clothe these with great honor, and our unrespectable parts are treated with greater respect, which our respectable parts do not need. Listen to this. Instead, God has put the body together, giving great honor to the less honorable, so that there would be no division in the body, but that the members would have the same concern for each other. So if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. If one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. Anybody who knows this passage, Paul goes on, he's talking primarily about the spiritual gifts and the different gifts that everybody has in the church. But you could make this application to also saying, basically every person in the church plays a part. There's a great diversity in the church, and I don't mean just ethnic diversity. I mean, there's a great diversity in the church, different backgrounds, different perspectives, different phases of life. We all have strengths and abilities that are related to that we bring into the church. If we lose an entire generation, it's like losing a part of the body. And then the sad thing, like I just said, those future generations, they're not going to be prepared to come in and replace that part. And what happens when the body starts to lose? It starts to die. We all have to remember, we all play a part in that. And again, with the millennials, this is why I feel such a burden for this. And because I've been there myself, I know what it's like to get away from God. We need to be trying to do everything we can to throw out that life preserver and say, please come join us. Because what this generation can bring to the church, the perspectives, the strengths that they do bring, we need. And I'll try not to go off on a rabbit trail with this because I'm almost here at the end. But there's so many people that fall into that millennial generation too we need to be wary of. And I don't want to talk about this too much. But if you think about this current generation, one of the things that's unique about this generation is the great diversity that's already within that generation itself. Within this generation, we see families. We see those that are just starting out in adulthood. We see those that are getting later on into adulthood. We see single parents. You want to talk about a group that's been cast out of the church? I don't know. I've personally spoken to single parents that tell me they want to be involved, they just don't feel welcome. We have to make sure that we have a community that shares those burdens. Let that single parent come in so that we can help shoulder the burden too. And you would not believe what they can bring into the church as well. So we have to have a heart for that. We have to have a heart for all those coming from different walks of life, different generations. And I know I'm talking primarily about this one generation, but no, we need all generations in the church to be the body that we're supposed to be. Because Paul goes on to talk in Ephesians, this time to the church of Ephesus, Paul mentions the body of Christ many times throughout the Bible. But in Ephesians chapter 4, he says, "But speaking the truth in love, let us grow in every way into him who is the head, Christ. From him the whole body, fitted and knit together by every supporting ligament, promotes the growth of the body for building itself up in love by the proper working of each individual part." In other words, we're not only a body, but we all have functions. If we're not doing those functions, then the body's not working right. And if one part of the body's not working right, then the rest of the body's going to start to suffer. It's going to be like a disease spreading through the body. The loss of the generation from the church would be like the loss of that body part. It would affect all the other parts, and we can't let that happen. We've got, and obviously, by building up that generation, by having those body parts that we need, that's what's going to help the church to grow. The alternative to that, if we don't, as you can probably imagine, is going to be death. And that's where we're headed right now. Those statistics I showed you earlier, that's where we're headed. Again, I just have to reiterate, because it hit me hard. Two-thirds of young adults right now have nothing to do with the church. We have to do something about it. And again, this is the burden that I have felt for some time, and I'm thankful to now be in a place where I think that we can move forward with that. And the thing is, there is a harvest that is ripe for the picking right now. The harvest is right out there just waiting. We've got to do this. Fight the good fight. Keep fighting the good fight. Let us see you fighting the good fight. Keep fighting the good fight. We need to be a community of believers. And that's the thing. And again, and when I preach, it's, I know sometimes it feels like you're being taught, this is what you need to do. The thing is, I'm so overjoyed, again, I have to say, because that's what I see here. It's one of the things that my wife and I have been just so overjoyed to see a church that is operating the way that it should. Keep it up. I've already seen, even just in the short time we've been here, I've seen the growth. Yes. And I feel like it's going to continue to grow even more, again, if we focus our eyes on this generation that needs us right now. Amen. I'm a part of that generation, so obviously, technically I am. I'm kind of in between, but I consider myself to be a millennial. This generation needs us. This generation needs us, and I know it. I feel it myself. Okay, as you can tell, there's no magic strategy or formula of how we're going to fix this. There's no, we don't need to have some meeting and come up with, we're going to have these programs and this and that and that. We just need to be the church. Amen. Be the church for what it is. And I love that. We keep saying there's just no judgment here. We have to realize a lot of this generation have been turned away from the church because they felt judged. So we have to make sure we're welcoming everybody in and helping them find their place. Again, shouldering each other's burdens. Because if we don't do this, again, the biggest cost that's going to be is the dying of the church. Because those two generations that are coming up behind, who's going to be there to disciple them? We can't just skip over a generation. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. You saw that graph. It goes down every generation. That's what's going to happen with the next couple generations if we're not careful. Amen. So I hope you'll pray with me. And again, I hope everybody will pray about this and just continue to take this on as a burden for this church. And especially as we try to start moving forward. When again, I'm going to be meeting with the young adults after church today because I want to talk about some things that we can do for the church and also to get more young adults into the church. Amen. So just be in prayer about that. And being prayer for the direction of the church. I'm excited, though. I have to say, I'm excited. I mean, right now, what's going on in the world scares me. But I'm excited to see what's happening here at NPR NAS. Amen. Amen. Turn that back over to you.